Welcome back to abettersociety.info. This sixth video is the second in a series dealing with what we're calling the hunter-gatherer societal pattern. And as you watch this video and the others in the series, we want to be sure to keep two things in mind. The first one is that we're not interested in studying any particular hunter-gatherer group, either those who live today or those who lived back in history. What we're concerned about is the pattern of this type of society and how the pattern has an influence on today's world. The second thing we want to always keep in mind is Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs. This hierarchy deals with human motivation. Why do we do what we do? And in this hierarchy, the first concern that normal folks have, and we're all pretty much normal folks, is our survival. We want to stay alive. And when the survival need is fairly well satisfied, then we become concerned about our safety. And when safety is fairly well satisfied, then we become concerned about being part of a group. And after that's fairly well satisfied, then we're concerned about having the esteem of other people in our group. And once that is fairly well satisfied, then we become concerned about being all that we can be, or self-actualization, as Maslow calls it. So now, keeping these things in mind, let's put ourselves in the world of hunter-gatherer people. And the first thing we want to understand is that what they cannot do. Hunter-gatherers do not know how to plant crops. They don't understand agriculture. They don't have any animal husbandry. They don't have any domesticated animals like cows and pigs and goats and sheep and camels. None of that. Everything that they need for staying alive, for living their entire lives, comes raw from nature. This includes their clothing, their medicine, their tools, their food, shelter. Everything comes to them raw. Now, it's true that as these people progressed throughout history, they developed better tool-making capabilities. In the beginning, for example, with weapons for hunting, probably the first weapon was a rock, and they just threw it at damn animals. And then someone developed the idea of sharpening a stick and hardening the sharp point of it in a fire. And then someone developed the idea of using rocks to make projectile points. And so they learned how to strap those onto the stick. Eventually they learned how to make throwing sticks so that they could throw their arrows or spears farther and harder. And eventually they developed bows and arrows. But still, everything that they had for survival was based upon just what they can find in nature. And the better the place that the people lived, the better their lives would be. And it's at this point that we first kind of run into a difficulty with the noble savage concept. If you do a search on hunter-gatherers, you'll come up with some information that is based upon the noble savage concept. And that idea is that the hunter-gatherers they lived in a place, and then when they kind of used up the resources from that place, then they moved to someplace else. And then when they used up that, then they moved someplace else. And this assumes that there was no competition for the resources. Now that may have been true, probably was true, way back in history when there were very few humans around. But as the tens of thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years went by, and there were more and more people, then people came in conflict with each other in order for them to have the best resources. One of the things that we could know that was the case is that there are people who live in very undesirable places. Take, for example, the San people, or sometimes known as the Bushmen of what is today Angola. I mean, and those people have obviously lived in some very undesirable locations. There's not hardly any water, food, natural resources are extremely sparse. And because they have adapted themselves to living in that environment, their ancestors have obviously been there for a very long time. So if the hunter-gatherer, noble savage concept really worked, they wouldn't live there. They would move someplace else and live in a much better place. But because of factors that we'll talk about later, they had to stay in that very undesirable place and continue to live there for thousands of years. Same would be true of people who live in the Arctic. I mean, the folks up in the Arctic, they don't have much in the line of plants to live off of. Everything that they get either comes from, the animals that are there. And so they have to fish or hunt. They have to kill seals and polar bear and whales. All the animals that are there and available in the Arctic. And that's a very tough place to live. So if you look at that, you'll understand that there was eventually a lot of competition for desirable land, because everything depended upon the land that you lived on. And you were either able to hold on to some very good land, or eventually you got kind of pushed off into some very undesirable places. And you kind of had a choice. I mean, you're either going to stay in the undesirable place, or you're going to figure out some way to get to the place where there is better land. But if somebody's in that better land, then you have to be concerned with, well, how are you going to get their land? And so we see in history lots of situations where hunter-gatherer type people, other people, saw some land that they wanted, and they went out and conquered it. And see, that provides the tension among hunter-gatherer societies, tension among the various different tribal groups. And so what did they do if they went out and conquered somebody else? Well, they killed them all. If tribal group A conquered tribal group B, then A killed everyone in B. I mean, they killed the men, the women, and the children. Jared Diamond in Guns, Germs, and Steel talks about that in several different places in his book. He has examples of it on page 291 and pages 53 and 54. And if you can look in the Bible. I mean, the Israelites, and if you read the book of Joshua, the Israelites thought that they were entitled to the Canaanites' land, and they conquered a lot of those cities in Canaan. The first one that is discussed is what happened to Jericho. And so what did the Israelites do when they conquered Jericho? Well, they killed all of the men, women, and children, except for one family. And if you look at the book, the Joshua book, in detail, you'll find out that they conquered a lot of different cities in Canaan. And that's exactly what they did with all of the men, women, and children who originally were on the land. They killed them all. And see, this is the pattern of the hunter-gatherer societies, and the pattern gets carried over into other social patterns. So this is nothing unusual. It's just the way it has worked back in history for thousands and thousands of years. And some people who have bought off on the noble savage concept may have a little difficulty understanding that or appreciating it. But I think if you'll watch additional videos on this subject, you'll see and understand how all of this worked and how it applies to the world today. And if we're going to really understand the world today, then we're going to have to really understand the world of the past. So we'll talk about this later, and I'll see you. Thanks a lot.